So there you are. You've been talking to the seller. You've gotten to know them and understand them so well. You've solved the person and you know exactly what they're trying to accomplish and what's most important to them. And now it's time to put pen to paper and start brainstorming the deal structure that's going to make this thing happen. In today's episode, we're going to dive into the letter S, the fourth step in our six-step process called the Y.E.S.S.E.S Framework for getting off-market sellers to accept your offers. Let's cue up the theme song and we're going to dive right in to solving the deal.
Welcome to Racking Up Rentals, a show about how regular people, those of us without huge war chests of capital or insider connections, can build lasting wealth acquiring a portfolio of buy and hold real estate. But we don't just go mainstream looking at what's on the market and asking banks for loans, nor are we posting "We Buy Houses" signs or just looking for, quote, motivated sellers to make lowball offers to. You see, we are people-oriented deal makers. We sit down directly with sellers to work out win-win deals without agents or any other obstacles and buy properties nobody else even knows are for sale. I'm Jeff from The Thoughtful Real Estate Entrepreneur. If you're the kind of real estate investor who wants long-term wealth, not get-rich-quick gimmicks or pictures of yourself holding fat checks on social media, this show is for you. Join me and quietly become the wealthiest person on your block. Now let's go rack up a rental portfolio.
Hey, thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Racking Up Rentals. So show notes for today's episode can be found at www.thoughtfulre.com/E48 for episode 48. Please do us a big favor by hitting the subscribe button in your podcast app right now. It really helps tell the platforms that people are listening and then share this show with other people, other thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs who are looking for a voice and a group to join like ours. Okay, onward with the show. So over the last few episodes, we have been talking about in great detail the Y.E.S.S.E.S Framework for getting off-market sellers to accept your offers. And so in the first episode, we talked about that concept as a whole. I gave you the big picture. And for the last 3 episodes, we've been diving deep. So to recap the overall Y.E.S.S.E.S framework, Y stands for you. It's all about you and what you are trying to accomplish and being deliberate about that to begin with. Secondly is the letter E. That stands for engage thoughtfully. Once you know what you're trying to accomplish, then we can figure out who we should be reaching out to and how to reach out to them in the right way that's going to set us up for the right type of conversation we want to have. The third letter is S for solve the person. This is the thing that's very uncommon, unfortunately, among many real estate investors, is not focusing enough on the people and just focusing on the property, the numbers, the dirt, the sticks, the bricks, and things like that. And that brings us to today. And today is the second yes. And this S stands for solve the deal. I want to remind you that you can download a PDF version outlining the whole Y.E.S.S.E.S framework very clearly at yes.thoughtfulre.com. Just go to yes.thoughtfulre.com and you can quickly download the whole PDF so you can have it as a reference guide as you listen to this and as you think about your own deals that you are working on. So what everybody wants to jump to, when they're starting in real estate investing and looking at a new opportunity and feeling excited about it, is solving the deal. So today's episode is very much about like what everybody kind of wants to be doing anyway. But it's so important that you don't fast forward to this spot. And I know you don't want to waste time talking to leads that aren't going to go anywhere, and that makes sense. But we oftentimes don't know if something's going to go anywhere until we've really spent enough time with the people. And so that's why I really, really encourage you to slow down and do not skip the very, very important process that we talked about in the last episode called solving the person. Solving the person is a very right brain type of activity. It's relational, it's intuitive, it's about asking questions and listening and reading between the lines and having empathy and really just being much more of a human rather than a computer and a machine. And in today's step, we're going to talk much more than about how we bring the left brain, the analytical side, the deal structuring side, back into the equation. And really at this point, we are going to be merging and marrying both the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain to put together a plan that's going to allow us to create a deal that makes sense from the very analytical, technical side, makes sense as an investment, but also meets the needs of the human beings involved, that being the seller and that being us as well. So get ready to bring your left brain and your right brain together into concert. So if you look at where we are right now, we really have a pretty good database, maybe some physical notes, but certainly in our head as well, a good database of both information and insights. And I'm sure you've heard me belabor this point before, but I will do it again because it's that important. Information is easy to gather. Sometimes you can even gather information without anybody else's help. What is this property worth? How much is owed still on this property? What are the current rents? What should the market rents be? When was the roof replaced? All that kind of stuff. That's information. You either have it or you don't. Insights, on the other hand, are a little bit different. Insights are much more about the people. It's not necessarily quite as literal. It might be just a feeling or a read on something or somebody or a situation. But at this point, we have taken our time, with the solve the person step of this, and we've been engaging thoughtfully. We may be 2 meetings in, we might be 20 meetings in at this point. Who knows? But at this point, we have a good database in our mind or on paper of the information and the insights we're going to need to try to put this puzzle together. And that's really what this is. This is a puzzle that we're now going to use both sides of our brain to solve the puzzle. So we're going to be looking at the puzzle pieces, but those pieces really are the information and the insights that we have. And we're going to be putting all the pieces out on the table, moving them around, looking at them and seeing how we can put them together in a way that makes sense. In this step, we're creating a deal structure, and ultimately the manifestation of the deal structure is it will become a proposal in the next step, right? That's the next step of the Y.E.S.S.E.S Framework is the letter E, and it stands for empathetic proposal, and that's what we'll talk about in the next episode. But we're basically trying to figure out what is the meat of that proposal going to be. And I just want to point out that the deal structure that we put together here, it could be simple and it might be complex, and it varies absolutely from deal to deal because each person is different. Each puzzle is different. And sometimes the puzzle pieces are not difficult to arrange, and sometimes they're a little bit more difficult to arrange, a little bit more complicated arrangement. But that's okay. We're not really worried about if it's a complicated deal structure or a simple deal structure. We just want one that works for everybody. So there's really kind of 3 things we're going to talk about in this step of solving the deal. The first one is deal analysis. And in the deal analysis step, we're going to really ask ourselves, now that we look at this deal from different angles, what works for us? We're going to go back to having a selfish perspective for just a brief period. What works for us? As we analyze the deal from these different angles and these different paths we could take, which one do we like better? What are we willing to do? What are we not willing to do? The second step is to look at structure. So we've analyzed the deal and we have determined kind of what we are willing to do, what we're not willing to do, and what things we need to accomplish from this deal. And so now we're going to try to create a structure that gives us the outcome that we have decided that we want, and also at the same exact time, the outcomes that we know the seller wants and needs too. So we're going to now arrange the puzzle pieces in a way that satisfies both us and our seller. Now, our seller doesn't know what those things are that we feel like we need to have, but we understand what theirs are. And so now it's our job to structure something that we're both going to be happy with, that takes into account the puzzle pieces that we have to work with. And then the last step is really about financial planning and financial structure. You've heard us say on this podcast that if you want to unlock the deal, you have to solve the person. But if you want to unlock the profits, you really have to solve the financing. And financing is really financial structuring and the source of the financing and the rates and the terms and just how it's set up. That's really the key that unlocks your ability to execute on a deal structure that you want to put together. So with that in mind, we're going to start first with analyzing. So this is, again, like I said, this is going back to you. Now, this is where you get to be selfish again and say, all right, well, let me look at these from my perspective and figure out like what do I like? What do I not like? What would be good enough for me and what would not be good enough for me? And what we do here is we implement what I call the triple threat acquisition strategy. Now, I have a whole episode on this. If you want to go back to episode 6 of this podcast, we have a whole episode talking about this. But the triple threat acquisition strategy says that for every deal that comes through our door, every seller that we have the opportunity and privilege to talk to, we are going to be taking a look at this opportunity through 3 different lenses. The first one is the long-term hold rental lens. The second one is a wholesale lens. And the third one is a flip lens. So in the rental lens, we're looking at it, we're asking ourselves the question, is this the kind of property I would want to hold for the long term? And if so, what type of deal structure would have to be in place in order for this actually to make sense as a rental property? When we're looking at that, we're taking a close look at the income and the expenses, right? And we're calculating cash flow. And then from that cash flow, we're kind of reverse engineering it and say, well, what level of debt, what payments, and thus what amount of debt overall could this property actually afford? It's really less about price in the case of a long-term hold rental, and it's much more about monthly outgoing payments. So we're going to analyze this through a full rental analysis, and then we're going to also take a look at it from the perspective of a wholesale or a flip deal. Now, a wholesale analysis and a flip analysis are actually very similar. They're very related. And in a wholesale analysis or a flip analysis, price matters greatly. Payments factor into some degree with a flip, certainly, because it means you have holding costs, but you're not looking at a long-term perspective on this. And so your payments over time are less important, and we're really focusing mostly on price. And in both the wholesale analysis and the flip analysis, we are looking at margin. You know, if we buy this property at a certain price, if we are going to we or somebody else are going to make some repairs or renovations or improvements to this property, what's that going to cost? What's it going to be worth after it's done? And if we work backwards and we look at all the costs we put into it from the acquisition to the repairs, what is the profit margin going to be after we sell it? And do those profit margins meet our standards? And if so, is that a project that we want to do? Meaning we would be the buyer and we would do the renovation and we would be the seller, and that's a flip. Or do we want to take this nice project that we know is going to make a buyer money and hand it off to another buyer to do that project instead of us for a smaller fee, but hand them a ready-to-do project? But both of those analyses are similar to each other. We're just asking ourselves, are we going to be the one to execute this plan, or is somebody else going to be the one to execute this plan? But either way, the plan has to make sense, and this is very much a buy low, sell high type of scenario. So we're using our triple threat acquisition strategy. And again, go back to episode 6 if you want a detailed description of that. And ultimately, we're going to analyze this from all 3 angles, and then we're going to look at it and we're going to say, which of these angles do we like best, right? We call this opportunity vision. You've seen the potential in this deal previously, even before getting up to this point, and now you've really given each of the 3 main options that you have a detailed look, a real deep consideration. And at this point, you probably have an opinion. You're probably saying, you know what? I think that this would be best with, say, being a rental. Or you look at this and you say, you know, someone's going to make a lot of money on this flip, but at this moment, I don't feel like I have the capacity to do it. Or I might value a $10,000 or $20,000 assignment fee now versus a $60,000 or $70,000 profit 4 months from now. But one way or the other, you're going to look at the 3 different opportunities, and one's going to resonate more or less with you. So you solidify your opportunity vision from this analysis, and now you have a clear perspective on what you would like to accomplish with this deal. Now, it's fantastic if you see 2 or maybe all 3 paths and say, I'd be super happy with any of these. Let me now go see what I could structure and what options I might be able to create and what I can negotiate. And then later, I will just pick the best of 3 very good outcomes. So now you've analyzed your deal and you've got a clear opportunity vision for what you want to take place. And now we're going to move on to trying to figure out how we're going to structure this deal. This is what I call deal architecture. And this is really, truly where the left brain and the right brain come together. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, it's an art, and it's a little bit difficult to explain purely in audio on a podcast. So I'm going to kind of give you how I think about it and how I see it. And just know that really what we need to do is practice together on real situations or real case studies. So after I explain this part, I'll come back and give you an example that should help paint this picture a little more vividly and a little more tangibly for you. But let's talk about the structure part as well as we can, just in audio format here. Now that you know what you want, the question is, how can you build something? How can you design and architect a deal that is going to give you what you want and give the seller what they want and they need? And like I mentioned before, this is really, truly like a puzzle. It's kind of like different types of puzzles. I do literally picture puzzle pieces, like jigsaw puzzle pieces, sitting in front of me as I am doing this. But it's also a bit of a lateral thinking puzzle sometimes too. Sometimes you have to question your assumptions about something or think in alternative and creative ways, how else could I give this seller what they're trying to accomplish? But it is a puzzle. And as a result, to be really honest with you, this is my favorite part of the whole thing. I love solving the person too, but I need to be intellectually stimulated. I need to be challenged. And this part of the process almost always delivers a puzzle that's fun and engaging to solve. And so I hope you choose to see it that way as well. And just like any puzzle, what we need to do is we need to see what we've got to work with, and we need to pull the pieces apart, right? If you were going to do a puzzle sitting on your table, your dining room table, the first thing you'd do is you'd probably dump all of the pieces on the table, and you'd probably turn them all over so you could actually see, the colors and the shapes and stuff on the puzzle. And you'd assess what you've got to work with. And you'd pull it apart so they weren't a bunch of just clusters of things. You'd want to be able to see them all individually. And even though the number of pieces in front of you might be kind of overwhelming, at least you can see them all separately. So the first question as we pull the puzzle pieces apart is, what do we have to include in this? What are the pieces that have to be in place? If you've got a seller who you have connected deeply with and you understand that maybe it's their one big thing, maybe it's just a logistical financial consideration, but they need to buy a particular car that's going to cost $20,000. So one of the absolute non-negotiable puzzle pieces that has to be involved, that you have to design your structure around, is that walking out of the closing room, they're going to have a $20,000 check in their hand. That might be one of the puzzle pieces that has to be in place. Okay, great. So there's one that has to be in place. Maybe another puzzle piece is that there has to be a scenario in which they are not going to be getting hit with a big capital gains tax bill right then. So your proposal then has to accommodate that. That might be another thing. Here's another potential puzzle piece. Maybe you have a finite amount of money that you are willing to work with. Maybe you have $30,000. So that's another puzzle piece that is almost like we have to glue it to the table. Like, this thing is here, and it has to be accounted for. It has to be accommodated in our plan. But we pull the puzzle pieces apart. We see, what do we have to accommodate? And then the next question is, what are some of the things that are optional to accommodate? So let's say, for instance, that your seller has this property and it has $125,000 outstanding mortgage on it. And from your conversations with them that they would be open to the idea of actually keeping that mortgage in place as part of your deal structure, right? Maybe you've tested that theory just a little bit with them in the previous steps, and you've been getting to know them. And that's not really what they care about. They're just concerned with getting on with their lives, perhaps, or getting to the next thing that they want to do, or getting that $20,000 for the car. And this part isn't that important to them. And you look at that mortgage and you say, well, sheesh, that's a great mortgage. We're 20 of 30 years into an amortization schedule, so every payment is making significant progress on principal paydown. It's at 4% interest, which is really quite nice as well. And our plan for this property overall, it would work well to leave that existing debt in place. Now, I realize that what I'm talking about here with leaving existing debt in place, that this is a more advanced topic. So if this is confusing to you, don't get hung up on that. My point is sometimes there are things that we have to accommodate in a deal, and sometimes there are things that we could accommodate in a deal, but we don't really need to. Maybe your seller is open to accepting payments for the next 10 years, but it doesn't matter that much to them. So that's an option to you, but it's not a requirement. So we look first at what do we have to accommodate. Secondly, we look at what could we accommodate, and we start simply moving the puzzle pieces around in our mind to come up with different scenarios that might work. I would highly recommend to you that you actually, if you are at all a visual person, draw a picture of this. Maybe even take sticky notes and make each sticky note the different puzzle pieces so that you can take them, you can look at them, you can pick them up, you can move them over here and move them over there, and you can actually map this out. So for instance, if I had a seller who had a mortgage that they absolutely did not want to have paid off for whatever reason, then I would know that that's something I really need to factor into my overall design of the deal structure. Again, I realize that this is a little bit conceptual and theoretical, and it's better if we have really concrete examples. So in just a moment, I'll give you one of those as well. Now that we have a structural idea in place about how we're going to put this deal together, the next question that we are just automatically led into is, what are the financing components that are going to enable this structure? Is there existing financing that we might want to keep in place? Is there new financing that we're going to need to bring in? Maybe that new financing is going to come from the seller themselves in the form of them letting us make payments to them. Maybe it's going to come in as new cash from the outside, like an outside lender, like a bank or a private lender or a hard money lender of some sort. Is this new financing, which components of it need to be in place for a short term? Which components of it need to be in place for a much longer term? And we look at the different types of financing that are going to be needed. Maybe some of it is initial cash. And we look at all of those things and we ask ourselves the question, what financing are we going to need in order to pull off the deal structure that we just designed? So let's take this and make this more concrete. And I want to give you a real example of a deal that I did. And this was a single family home in a great neighborhood in my town. And the fact that it was a great neighborhood already gave me a lot of different options. It made me feel like, well, I'd be happy to hold on to this property. It would be easy to assign it because any other wholesaler, that is, any other flipper would be happy to do a project in this neighborhood. It made me feel like I wanted to maybe flip it as well. So I felt like there was a lot of good opportunity just based on the location alone. Also, this property had what I would call good bones. It had a lot of potential. It had a very large basement with great ceiling height that was just, in my mind, begging to be developed into livable space. Had a nice big attic. Had a nice big yard even where you might be able to build something else separately, and just the way the house sat and was situated on the lot. So there was a lot of room to make something more than what was there when I bought this house, what we call expandability. So in this case, I already know that I like all the different paths I can go down, but I'm going to take the time and do the triple threat acquisition strategy analysis, and I'm going to look closely at each of these options. So first I look at the rental possibilities, and even that I break down into a couple different scenarios. What if I simply keep it exactly as is and just maybe adjust the rents to market rents, but not even change the property at all? Option B, a variation of that, might be, what if I improved the property a little bit without changing anything too structural, just kind of made it a nicer version of what it was already, and got the property to market rents? What would that scenario look like? Then I also looked and I said, I think I could build out a separate unit in the basement. I knew the zoning would allow me to do that because that's part of the information that I gathered as part of this process. I thought, I bet I could build out something in the attic too. And I bet I could expand the livable, rentable square footage of this house significantly and have a second unit. So I said, what if this now became a 2-unit property that was nicely renovated? What would those rents look like, and what would that cash flow look like? That was my complete and thorough analysis for rentals. And I thought, well, if I could get a new mortgage after I do all this renovation, what would that mortgage potentially look like? Let me pencil that in. And do I still have enough cash flow that I'm excited about, and cash flow that meets my standards? So I did that analysis and I said, yeah, this is a great plan. I could keep it as is for now. And then as soon as possible, I could do this big renovation. And then certainly after it was all renovated and the new rents were in place and a new loan was in place, it would be an excellent, excellent rental. So that was my first analysis. Then the second and third analyses I did was the flip analysis and the wholesale analysis. And again, these are very similar thought processes. We're just trying to figure out, is this flip going to make sense for somebody? And then secondly, do we want that somebody to be us who does the project, or do we want to hand it off to somebody else? But either way, it has to be a profitable endeavor for whoever is going to do it. So in this case, I looked at mostly the purchase price, which was $345,000 in this case. I looked at the renovation cost of what I would spend in order to renovate it for the market who would buy it as a retail flip, right? So that renovation is different than a rental renovation I would do. So I looked at that and I said, I think I'd probably spend $100,000 renovating this to make it the optimal single-family home to resell. What would it be worth after I did that $100,000 worth of work? And thus, what could I sell it for? And if I did sell it, what would the profit be? And then I looked at that and I said, okay, well, if in, say, 6 months I could have that profit, that would be my flip scenario. And I looked at that and I said, actually, that wouldn't be bad at all either. Or I could wholesale it. So I take the same thought process and I say, well, what if I assigned this opportunity to somebody else for, say, $365,000, meaning they would pay me a $20,000 assignment fee. I would get my profits immediately. I wouldn't have to do the work. And they would be doing a deal that now costs them $365,000 to get into, but they have their $100,000 renovation, and they're still going to make plenty of money that they'd be happy with afterwards. That was my wholesale analysis. And so I look at all three of these, and frankly, I said, these are all great options. I feel like the purchase price that I've got here, the expandability of this property in an excellent location, gives me 3 good options. So now, which of these do I want? And in this case, my general perspective on the world is that if I can hold on to something, then I will do that whenever I can. Unless I really need maybe the proceeds of a flip or an assignment or a wholesale deal, then I will probably try to hold on to things as I can. So my opportunity vision says, I want to hold on to this thing as a rental. I know it's going to take more work to do this, but I think I'm really going to be thanking myself over the long term. So then I start to look at, well, what's the deal structure that's going to work? What are the puzzle pieces here? Well, in this case, the purchase price is $345,000. This seller, after me getting to know her pretty well for quite a while, needed all of those proceeds at closing. She did have a little bit of an underlying mortgage to pay off. She wasn't willing to have that stay in place. She really wanted the cash because she wanted to do something very specific. So I knew I was going to have to come to the closing table with $345,000 one way or the other. That was a required element. That's a puzzle piece glued to the table. That's going to have to happen. Whether that comes out of my pocket or somebody else's is a different question, but we're going to need $345,000 on the day of closing. I know that to renovate this property to my full vision of a 2-unit property with maximum rents, I'm going to need about $200,000. It's going to be a big, big project. So what I do is I calculate what is on the day of closing, before I can do any renovations with the existing tenants in there, what is my cash flow going to be at closing? And then I also calculate what is my cash flow going to be once I've completed this renovation. I've got 2 different tenants paying market rents in there. And what is that cash flow going to be? And then I also look and I say, well, what is this property going to look like from a financeability standpoint after my renovation? How is a bank or a different lender going to look at this property? How are they going to underwrite it? How are they going to look at me and underwrite me? And what do I think is a reasonable and likely educated guess about the type of loan that I could put on this property after I have completed my renovation? And that's great. And that's long-term thinking. But the first question I have that leads us to the third step here, which is our financial planning to accomplish our deal structure, is how am I going to get the cash to close on this property and to complete these pretty significant renovations? So in that case, I had to say, well, I need $345,000 to close. I need $200,000 over the course of about 6 months to do this renovation. So I'm going to need $545,000 total. And I don't believe I'm going to find a lender who's going to just happily lend me $545,000 without me seeing any skin in the game. So I say, well, here's what I'm willing to put into the deal. And so I say, I think the answer there is $45,000. So I put $45,000 down on the purchase of the property. This private hard money lender is going to come in. They're going to provide the other $300,000 needed to close. And then they're going to provide all of the $200,000 over the course of the next few months for the renovation. So now I know what financial structure I need, and it's really a two-phase financial structure. I need the financing at first to close the deal and to do the renovations, and then I need replacement financing after the renovations are done that will create a long-term hold scenario that works with the future pro forma of this property. This particular deal I just described to you is now very commonly called a BRRRR deal. That's BRRRR, which stands for buy, renovate, re-rent, refinance, and then repeat the process over and over again. This idea has been popularized by the good people over at Bigger Pockets, and I must give them credit and hand it to them. They put a great proprietary term to something that people have been doing for a long time and that makes perfect sense, but they've now gave it a name and everybody can refer to it in a certain way. But this structure makes great sense. You buy something with whatever financing you need to get it closed. You do your renovations in a way that completely changes the picture, the income potential of the property, the value of the property. Then you refinance the property, which pays off the existing initial loan that you use to get it and gives you, in most cases, most of your cash back from the first deal as well. And now you've got your capital back and you can move forward and you could do another deal. So, I feel like this episode is a little intense. And while I try to make it as understandable as I possibly can, the truth is sophisticated real estate entrepreneurship is, well, it's sophisticated. It can get a little bit complicated, but if we slow down and we pull the pieces apart and look at it as a step-by-step process, we can absolutely get through it. But the truth of the matter is that while some people just come in and they just shout out low prices, buy low, sell high all the time, our more elaborate and sophisticated analysis of these things will give us much different, much better, and much greater results over time. If you can get comfortable with the idea of merging your left brain and your right brain into this process, I know that in this process, this solve the deal, they come together in what might feel like a collision in your mind. We're looking at how do we give every person involved what they want? How do we have the deal make sense? But that is the puzzle piece that allows us, my friends, to do deals that others can't do. Others often don't even understand them, can't figure out how to put the deal together because they're not following this process. So that is it for today's episode of Racking Up Rentals. You may feel like you need to go take a nap after listening to this, and I hope I haven't confused you too much, but this is really where the rubber hits the road with what we do, and it is a beautiful thing. Again, there are show notes for today's episode at www.thoughtfulre.com/E48. Please do us a big favor by hitting the subscribe button in your podcast app. And also, if you wouldn't mind, rate and review the show. That is so helpful for letting other people know whether this show is going to be a fit to help them reach their goals like it is for you. Did you know that we also have a Facebook group for thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs? It's called Rental Portfolio Wealth Builders, and we would love to have you join us in that group. Just go to group.thoughtfulre.com and it'll redirect you right there, and you can hit the join button to join us in that group. Lastly, if you liked this episode, and I hope you did, please take a screenshot of it if you're listening on your phone and post that screenshot to Instagram. Tag us at, we are at Thoughtful Real Estate, just all spelled out. And again, that helps spread the message about what we are doing and the thoughtful approach to building wealth long-term through real estate entrepreneurship. I will see you in the next episode. Until then, this is Jeff from the Thoughtful Real Estate Entrepreneur signing off.
Thanks for listening to Racking Up Rentals, where we build long-term wealth by being win-win deal makers. Remember, solve the person to unlock the deal and solve the financing to unlock the profits.